Hey, what's up, Booker Cups? I've got a real treat for you today. Today we are going to spend a little time looking at one of the modern Chinese classics called The True Story of Ah Q. And we're going to spend a lot of time on that title. Maybe more than you want to, but I think it's going to be fun. Yeah, this is a story by an author named Lu Xun. That's a nom de plume. His real name was Zhou Shuren. And he was from Hangzhou, which is a Wu speaking area near Shanghai. However, from Ah Q is Cantonese. Not quite sure what's going on with that. At one point, it's definitely not Hanyu or Mandarin area because at one point the successful scholar calls AQ a turtle's egg in Mandarin. It's specified in Mandarin. I think this village. He's from the village of Zheng. No, not Zhengzhuang. Weizhuang. Weizhuang village, and I think it's probably in a Cantonese, somewhere southern China anyway. Definitely southern. Okay, let's look at AQ. Ah is like a title or interpolation, somewhere between Mister and mate. So polite as in Mister, but familiar as in mate, as Australians or northern Brits might use it. Now, Q is very weird. It's not Chinese, first of all. It would be pronounced ch if it was in a word like chi, tai chi. But as a standalone like that, it's just a letter. And in fact, it's a Western letter. What are we to make of this? Is it for question? One thing I don't know about Lu Xun is if he knew English. And I'd love to know. And if he did, then I have a lot of speculations. But anyway, I'm sure that proper Chinese literature scholars, I speak Chinese just enough to talk about food, family, and the weather. So really basic. So I'm sure they can debunk a lot of this. This is going to be one of those videos where a lot of the questions about talking me down from one of my central flights of fancies that I like to take about these literary themes. And today, all around his name. So the title in Chinese is going to be Ah Q Zhong Zhuan. Zhong meaning true, real, and Zhuan story. Uh, I can't help you with the other characters here. Q obviously would be in the Latin because my Chinese is very basic. But I do know the character for Zheng because it's the one that's used for a tally because it's got like an I and then like a dissection of the I into like an E over here, and then one little tail sticking up almost all the way, but leaving a space on the back, which makes 5 strokes. So the way we would do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cross, that's how they tally in Chinese. Oddly, the character um, for 5 in Chinese looks like it would take 5 characters, but as one of those strokes is actually bent, it's actually written in 4 characters. All right, so that's more than you ever wanted to know about all that. I would say, what type of story is this? That's my first question for you. Do you agree with scholar Judong Zhuang that this is an allegory, or even maybe a national allegory a la Jameson? Um, I have my doubts. I think we maybe can say, looking at these chapter titles, for example, the intro, that's pretty basic, but next we have AQ's victories. Chapter 3, further account of AQ's victories. 4, tragedy of love. 5, problems of making a living. Okay, that one's a bit more prosaic. But 6, we're back to these big themes, resurgence and decline. 7, revolution. 8, barred from revolution. And 9 is the grand finale. So I think if I were forced to pick a genre for this, I might choose mock epic. It is funny. It's a funny read. I think not even knowing much or anything of Chinese history, you can get that this is funny. Um, Lu Xun wrote a lot of other stuff, Madman and all kinds of great stuff. But this is what he's definitely most famous for. He belonged to various literary groups such as the Dawn Blossom, the Unnamed group, and he's sort of the father, I would think we could say, of Xinwen Shui, the new literature. Um, and this new is important because in the story, the first chapter's all about his name, so I think I'm justified at least in going on about this for 1/8 of this talk. Um, they're saying that they can't trace him. And by the way, every time he says background, it's in quotation marks. I read this in translated in English. Um, because your name also gives a clue to your origin, right? So we're not sure where he's from. We don't know his name. The only thing we do know for sure, it's not Gui, Gui being noble. So the one thing we know is that he's not noble. And then it is said that that if we had his name, we could then look it up in the 100 surnames, so we might know he was like Tian Shui from Gansu. But we don't have that. But in fact, we have this Q, this Latin Q, which they say is this fad coming from the new youth. So here we got the new coming in again. And they deplore, of course, the villagers are deploring it as they're trying to figure out who this guy Ah Q is. And here's why. Ah Q has a vision of himself in his mind, in his own idea of himself that is very different, I think, from how he's seen from the outside. He has a strong interior locus of control, as we would say in psychology, which is fascinating, right? Because in China, typically, we're supposed to be all about the community. But I would say this is not Ah Q's story. This is Ah Q's relationship with the village, Wei Zhuang, Ah Q Wei Zhuang story. Because the major victories of Ah Q actually take place off stage. When he goes away at a certain point, comes back rich, and boy, does the attitudes towards him change then. And he doesn't even try to hide. He says, I was a petty. Not only does he say I was a thief, he says I was a petty thief. He was basically like a lookout man for some little gang. He wasn't even a great thief. So this is Ah Q. So basically, why I don't think it's an allegory, tell me what do you think of this. If we share in his interiority, then what precisely is the allegory here? This is what I'm not 100% clear on with the allegory idea. Okay, so I would ask, do we think there's a lot in the beginning chapter also about, so he gets in trouble because he sort of claims or claps along with the Zhao clan. He sort of conflates himself with the Zhaos. There are two big families in the village. There's the Zhaos, who are sort of rich, and their son is the successful county scholar, which means he took the examination. So he's like he's a Mandarin, right? He's a Confucian scholar. And then there's this other family, the Chiens, something like that, that the son went to Japan, became sort of a Japanophile, come back with his Q cut off. What is meant by a Q is this long sort of ponytail that they wore in the back of their base of their head, the men. He's called, so they're called the successful county scholar or candidate, the successful county candidate, and the bogus foreign devil. So you must know that marking him as a Japanophile is almost like calling him a Nazi for the Chinese feelings at this juncture. This story came out in 21, but it's all about it's set in the time of the revolution of 1911. Okay, so now the one thing I don't want to try to get into talking about too much is face. It appears in name at least once, and here's where, part of why I don't want to go into it is that I lived in China 3 times and still don't have any idea about this whole idea of face. And also I don't have, since I only have the English here, I don't know, are we talking about Guanxi, what exactly the Chinese rendering of this was. So Ah Q felt first disappointed, then resentful. The despicable Whiskers Wang has so many, he himself so few. What a great loss of face. And what he's talking about, Whiskers Wang there's also these 2 lowly characters, Whisker Wang and Young Di. that AQ thinks he's better than, but he of course gets beat up by Whiskers Wang right away, and later by Young D, pulled by his Q and banged kowtowed against the wall, right? So these Qs, they didn't sound like they were very convenient in a bar fight. But yeah, so he's picking his lice and popping them in his teeth. And AQ is envying him. How dare this lowly Whiskers have more lice than me? So I think that in the early chapters, what can we make of the food analogies? At a certain point, he's getting thrashed. This is a little bit later when he makes a faux pas with a woman. He's getting thrashed on the threshing floor. He's literally like, being taking the place of the grain. At another point, he's compared to sort of the sacrificial meat hanging in the Confucian temple. Do you feel like me that maybe there's a scapegoat idea here, that maybe AQ is the scapegoat for the village? You'll see what I mean at the end. By the way, spoilers, as with me as always. So that's basically the setup on the beginning of this story. AQ's further victories, what happens? He palms the pate of a poor nun, but he it sort of gets the better of her, and everyone at the tavern is laughing, and he's the hero. But it's his undoing because her skin is so smooth, he feels it on his thumb, and he becomes quite aroused, for lack of a better word. So he's slapped by Zhao. He's saying he feels, I'm great. I have been slapped. Not only have I slapped, I've been slapped by Zhao, the biggest guy in town, right? As a son slaps his father. So now he's going to debase himself in front of the women. Now, by the way, he lives in the tutelary temple because he has no family. And he makes himself unwelcome even there after the fallout with the women. And he lives by odd jobs. And Zhao, of course, and the other rich families are the ones that give him most of these jobs. And then after he messes up following the nun incident, he doesn't get any work at all. They all go to Young D for the chores. So he really puts himself in this horrible position, which is why he has to go away to the city and becomes a thief. So let's talk about women. What do you think of the place of women in this story? In the chapter Tragedy of Love, we read that woman is a menace to mankind. Yeah. It says something like citizens of China would all be saints or sages were it not for the terrible influence of women. As you can see, it says, following AQ's restless night of tossing and turning and mouthing woman, woman, woman. There's also the case of the Japanophile, the bogus foreign devil's wife, who, when he comes back without his Q, tries to throw herself in the well only 8 times. And as AQ says, she's a bad wife. Why did she stop at 8 times? Well, after AQ gets himself all agitated and makes a move on the maid, on Wu, in one of the household, the Zhao household, I think, she also runs off to commit suicide, but of course she's stopped. Now, I will say, there's a conflation, right, of the sort of viewpoint of our main character, AQ, that makes it not necessarily easy to know how Lu Xun felt about these attitudes towards women. I'm not going to make a statement on that either way. I just like to say that it's important to remember those things when we sometimes go off on authors because of things that they have their characters say, when it's not necessarily the author's viewpoint. It may be. I also can tell you from having experienced village life a little bit myself, there are these sort of rituals where there's a time after the marriage, arranged marriage in a village in Mali, when the new wife, after a set period, a couple weeks or something, has to sort of run away to go back to her family of origin. But of course, she goes with no water and no money, and she will not survive. And then of course they chase her and bring her back to the village. And there's a sort of formula that all this. I guess like some people that they have to they reenact the old kidnap marriages, and you have to pay to get the bride or is it the husband, the groom. Anyway, you have to ransom one of them. I haven't been to any of those kind of weddings. So anyway, I'm not sure how we're to take all of this meditations on womankind and whatnot. Only that it's there, it's interesting, and I think it's worth discussing, and I'd love to hear what you think of it. Okay, so another thing. When he's being thrashed on the hulling floor, I'm put to mind of a jataka. Jatakas are tales of the lives of the Buddha, in which the various animals are. Indra comes down to earth and wants to see how creatures are, and the various creatures come to feed him. The otter brings him a fish, and the monkey brings him some fruit. I can't remember everything, but the rabbit brings him grass, which does him no good. Indra, in this case, is the body of a emaciated hermit. And so the rabbit, which of course Buddha, jumps into the fire and offers him himself. Now, of course, this is more Confucian China that we're talking about here. So you're going to be easily able to notice my more Buddhist background, and might be a good place for you to attack my ideas if you find them sort of overbearing and maybe misapplied here. But I just thought I would mention that story, and that's the rabbit that's in the moon, by the way. You see the rabbit in the moon. Okay, problems making a living. As I said, no one wants to give him odd jobs anymore. He goes off, becomes a thief, comes back rich. Everybody treats him well until he runs out of money. It says kind of interesting statement here. It says that the village custom was to respect unusual things, not to disregard them. This also might fly in the face of some people's views of China. I can just tell you that I find China fascinating, endlessly fascinating, and any formulas, any hypotheses I ever formed about people there was constantly being tested and changed. And I think it's a lot probably to do with that, not necessarily having the interiority, and certainly I don't speak Chinese well enough to know what's going on beneath that surface, right? Okay, so he breaks into the convent, steals some turnips, chased by a dog, all this good stuff. Then we got resurgence and decline. All right, let's get into the revolution. So revolutionaries come. Ah Q keeps being like behind the eight ball. So he wants to join the revolution, but he comes to warn the nuns, and the revolutionaries have already been there. And then he says, well, what do you mean? And she says that the scholar, they came, they broke the tablet, long live the Emperor Qin Empire. And oh, by the way, the valuable bronze brazier or whatever it was to Guanyin has disappeared. But anyway, what blows Ah Q's mind is that these revolutionaries were bogus foreign devil and the successful county scholar. So they, who didn't used to get along, have sort of convoluted to get ahead of this revolution thing, and we'll see later if they pull it off. And they began the revolution in the village, because everything here is about keeping in mind that this is how the massive movements of China, right, and all this history and all of this lore impacts a small village. How is it lived in this small village? How is it acted out there? So Confucius was asked by Lord Wei what would be the first thing he would do if he were sort of in charge to make reforms. And he said the first thing he would do was rectify the names So we're back to names again. First thing he would do is rectify the name. So there's a long Confucianist discussion and analects about why that is. I won't bore you with. You can look it up. It is interesting, I think. But anyway, so right away, this story is telling us, none of the titles really changed. The captain is still the captain. I mean, the magistrate has a new name like assistant administrator or something like that. But basically, the bigwigs are still the bigwigs, and nothing much has changed except in name. And there's even a joke wherein they pay $8 to get these badges, these silver peach badges. Peaches or persimmons? There seems to be some confusion because it's the persimmon oil party, they call it. But this is because they think it's shuyodang, but it's actually jiyodang. G is freedom, so it's actually the Freedom Party, but they mispronounce it and think it's the persimmon oil party. Okay, of course, when Ah Q comes in on the bogus foreign devil haranguing, the new cadres in his courtyard, he stumbles, he mumbles, kind of like I'm doing now. He's not very articulate. This is a big theme with him, as we're going to see much more in a minute in his downfall. And he does manage to spurt out at a certain point, that kind of ignoring him, that he wants to join the revolution. But he's chased away. We're not even sure if they even heard him. So he's persona non grata even in the revolution. Poor guy. All right. You really do feel for Ah Q. I think so. I mean, I haven't talked to too many people who have read this, but I just can't imagine too many people not really siding with Ah Q, even though he's bad and he's immoral and he's pathetic, and but in his mind he's great, aren't we all? So he's made the judge calls him out. He thinks it's a monk because he's got a shaved head. The judge calls him out. He's in a yamen little cell in the courtyard, in the compound there, with two other men. One owes rents to one of the landlords, and the other doesn't even know what he's in there for. I thought these were very interesting. I mean, it's a one sentence passing thing, but I thought that was very interesting. So who are the victims of this revolution, right? And of course, Ah Q, what he's in there for is somebody robbed the Jows. Now, it's not said that it's the revolutionaries, right? Because, clearly we are putting down the feudal society. Clearly we are pointing out problems in the scholar system, in local magistrates, all of this. But towards the revolutionaries, well, things are very much in flux in China, aren't they? And one has to be a bit careful. But anyway, somebody steals everything. It's never solved. But of course, who's going to be blamed for it? Our scapegoat, Ah Q. So, let's see, what else have we got here in the grand finale? Yes, he's asked more than once. He's called out 3 times, I think, to be interrogated. One time he's made to sign his confession. That's going to be very significant. And each time he's asked, do you have anything to say? And each time he says nothing. Nothing. And the final scene, everybody's super disappointed with his execution. First of all, because he's shot instead of beheaded. That's not really his fault. But because he didn't sing any operas, and there's a list of the various operas that he should have sung. He wanted to sing them. But his hands were tied, you see. His hands were tied. How could he sing opera if his hands were tied? So he didn't sing any opera on the way out of life. But at one point, he does say, in 20 years, what is the quote? In 20 years, I'll be a stout young man again, which is a citation from something else. And also scattered dust. So clearly there is some Buddhist, thinking here still with reincarnation. And the scattered dust especially I'll talk about in a second. And now what I want to talk about is the way he signs his name. Of course, he can't write. They tell him just to draw a circle. He tries to draw a circle, but, he's trembling. So he draws something that I like to imagine looks a bit like a Q. Or a round head with a ponytail. Maybe. There's a famous Chinese story. This is Taoist more than this is Taoist, not Buddhist. although I'm sure the Buddhists also appreciate it. In what it's called the oxen, the ox cart, and everything disappears. You know, the man, the cart, the bull, the bird on the bull's back. I can't remember all the pieces. There's like 8 pieces until all that's left is this circle. Of course, that's the next to last frame. The final frame is the empty frame, of course. But this next last circle is this almost perfect, you know, imagine beautiful Chinese brush stroke, right? But not quite ceiling, just O. So I also thought of that, and I also thought of the mirror. The mirror is the Buddhist, image for nirvana, whatever, with this dust upon it. In fact, I'm sure I'll do a talk on Gao Xingjian's. I'll probably do Longshan, Soul Mountain, which is his one novel. But he was mainly known as a playwright. He did one about the 8th Buddhist patriarch, I want to say, called The Other Shore, I think it is, in which the way that this guy becomes patriarch, he's like a floor sweeper, very lowly, and there's like a poetry competition, and the scholars write something on the wall about, you know, how to clean the mirror or something like that. And he, in the night, sort of writes something vaguely along the lines of, you know, the mirror is already clear, or you don't need to clean the mirror, and that he's made the new patriarch. All right, I think that's pretty much everything I wanted to say about Ah Q. What do we think? Is Dan up his tree again? What is with this crazy big theory, all to do with this simple title of this guy named Ah Q who thinks he's great and nobody else thinks much of him, and he doesn't, poor guy, end up having much of a life. But hopefully, if we believe with the Buddhists, maybe he can be reincarnated into a better situation. It is said in the Great Victory chapters that one of his great skills was his ability to forget. You know, he doesn't hold grudges. So that's the one really positive, unequivocal skill that is his, and is not, you know, mock heroism. It's not, satirical in any way. He has got this great ability to forget, and a certain sort of humility. Anyway, Ah Q is a seminal and really enigmatic figure in Chinese modern literature, and please give it a read, because this book seems really thick. But this is an anthology. It's only 8 very short chapters, so not that much at all. And I think you'll definitely enjoy it, and I would really enjoy it if you would join me in this discussion and tell me I'm full of, you know, Q. Okay. Sanjay, thank you.